name is Ray Bertram. I live in Arkansas on top of Petit Jean Mountain. I suffer from optic neuropathy. I am legally blind, and I have become known as the Blind Filmmaker of Arkansas. The Division of Services for the Blind assisted me in getting my camera and production equipment, even my laptop that I use, for which I'm always grateful. And recently, I've added a green screen setup to my work to expand what I can do. I'm still learning how to use it, and I've found that the best way to learn how to use it is by simply using it and experimenting with different ideas. So, along those lines, I have decided that I would like to do this kind of video. I've never done this kind of video before, and this is different for me because I'm usually behind the camera where I'm most comfortable, but I'm coming out of my comfort zone on this one so that I might experiment and see if I can do this video and what all's involved in it. And this is very special because it involves one of the first books that I ever remember. I grew up in Charleston in the 1970s. We moved to Charleston, West Virginia in 1970. I was 2 years old. My father worked in downtown Charleston with the Appalachian Educational Laboratories. He had a PhD in education, and he was the director of that facility. Many of my most cherished memories comes from my childhood in Charleston, West Virginia, and one of the very most cherished is that of my mother taking me to the public library in downtown Charleston. And the library was very large, 3 or 4 stories tall, and the thing I remember the most about it was the gigantic columns on the outside that ran from the ground all the way up to the roof, like a Greek temple. And I can remember climbing the stairs on the inside. I never seem to remember an elevator. And I remember climbing the stairs up to the children's floor, which was large. And the first book that I ever remember seeing there was this book by Doris Byrne called The Summerfolk. And I found it in the shelf, and I loved it so much that every time my mother would take me to the library, I would go straight to where I knew this book was, and for the longest time I'd pull it out, and this was the book that I would always want to bring home. And I would look at the pictures over and over again. My mother would read it to me. And that's a very good memory for me. So you can imagine, I was very delighted when about 10 years ago I went on the internet to a rare and used bookstore and actually found a vintage copy of this book. So I ordered it, and now I get to read it to my children, which I do at least once every couple of weeks, I think. And every time I do, I love to, one, because they like the book, but also because it reconnects me with some of the best times of my own childhood. So I'm sharing things with my children when I read it on multiple levels, I guess. Well, without further ado, let me read this book. It is, as I said, it's called The Summerfolk. It's written and illustrated by Doris Byrne. And it was actually produced in 1968, which coincidentally was the same year that I was born. Willie Potts' house was on a sand dune. In back of the house was a swamp. But in front, the sand led all the way down to the sea. Although the house was little more than a shanty, Willie and his dad, Joe Potts, lived there both winter and summer. For Joe Potts was a fisherman. All winter long, life seemed to go along nice and steady for Willie and Joe Potts. But all summer long, well, that was another kettle of fish. Every summer, strange people came from the city for a holiday beside the sea. These strangers were called Summerfolk. And if there was one thing on which Willie and Joe Potts agreed, it was that they didn't have any use for Summerfolk at all. The Summerfolk set up big umbrellas on the beach. They dropped peanut butter sandwiches in the sand and, all in all, did an unnecessary amount of hooting and hollering. Worse yet, they raced about in fancy motorboats that went very fast and went screek, thick as sand fleas and twice as pesky, muttered Joe Potts. Summerfolk, grumbled Willie. Joe Potts had a boat that was neither fast nor fancy, and it went pop, 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 pop. When the Summerfolk set up their umbrellas on the beach and began to drop their peanut butter sandwiches, sand fleas, Joe Potts would mutter, and off he would go to fish for cod in his boat. Willie had a boat too. One day, he had found it sitting on the bottom of the bay under 3 feet of water. Willie allowed that it was in a rundown condition, and he did his best to patch it up. He mended it with boards and scraps, nails and paint, tar and caulking cotton. But in spite of all his efforts, there was no overlooking the truth. Willie's boat leaked like a sieve. The only safe place to use his boat was in the swamp, where the water was never deeper than Willie's waist. So, when the Summerfolk set up their umbrellas and began unnecessary hooting and hollering, Summerfolk, Willie would grumble, and off he would go to the swamp. The swamp was bushy, muddy, and shallow. It was choked with wild rose bushes and tule grass and had only a few patches of what could be called open water. "'Tain't fit for boating," Willie would mutter. Still, he would bail his boat and catch pollywogs in a jar. Then he would bail his boat and catch dragonflies for a while. But most of the time, he would lie back in his boat, stare at the sky, and get his head nice and empty, which was the way that Willie liked it best. One summer, on the longest day of the year, Willie was in his boat as usual. His head was just beginning to feel pleasantly empty when the back of his neck began to prickle. Everyone knows when the back of your neck prickles, it means someone is watching you. So Willie raised his head and peered over the gunnel. Sure enough, it was someone. "Summerfolk," grunted Willie to himself. It was a strange breed of Summerfolk to Willie, but he didn't let on. "Lovely day," said the Summerfolk. "Might rain," said Willie. "Beautiful lake," said the Summerfolk. "Swamp," said Willie. "Fine boat," said the Summerfolk. "Leaks," said Willie. "Let's take a water trip." "I love water trips," said the Summerfolk. "Won't hold to," said Willie. "Then we can take my boat, and we'll make a flotilla, which is fun, if not more so," said the Summerfolk. "Would you like to see my boat?" "Don't mind," said Willie. The Summerfolk explained that his name was Federly, which was a new kind of name to Willie. Willie followed Federly through the tall grass on a path that was cool and squishy to the toes. Finally, Federly parted the reeds. There was a boat. It had a crow's nest and running lights and other fancy riggings and fittings. Willie had never seen a boat anything like it before, but he didn't let on. "Might tend to yaw in a following sea," said Willie. The flotilla pulled away from the tools into the open water, with Federly doing most of the work, if not all of it. But he didn't seem to mind. He scrambled to the crow's nest, took a reading from his compass, and set a course for north-northeast. "First port of call will be Rosebud's stately Wain," Federly announced. "It's mid-morning and time for brunch," which comes halfway between breakfast and lunch. Rosebud is a great little brunch fixer after she's gotten used to you. Have you ever been to Rosebud's stately Wain? "Never heard of the place," said Willie. Rosebud seemed shy and hung back when they arrived. "More Summerfolk," grumbled Willie to himself. Rosebud's stately Wain was like no house that Willie had ever seen before. He kept a straight face and didn't let on. "Briars is hard to keep down," said Willie. Soon, Rosebud got used to them and began to feel brunchy. She spread a mat woven of reeds. There she served mint tea, wafers, truffles, and tarts. "What's your favorite food, Willie?" she asked. "Oatmeal mush," said Willie. Federly got out his guitar and they sang for a spell. Rosebud sang a song which she had made up herself and of which she was quite proud of in her own shy way. "Frogs sing and muskrats chortle, ducks quack and turtles snorkel. Come to Rosebud's stately Wain, this day will never come again." "Blow the man down," said Willie. When the flotilla shoved off again, Rosebud's fore and aft rigged vessel came too. This time they steered south-southeast through the narrow passageway between hillocks and hummocks of bushes and bulrush. "Next port of call will be the Green Alder Mansions, home of Cork and Spinner," Federly announced. "It's midday and time for a spree. The Green Alder Mansions is the place to sport and frolic, and Cork and Spinner sport and frolic like nobody's business. So ho for the briny deep." "We're scraping bottom," said Willie. Willie had never seen the like of the Summerfolk Cork and Spinner. And as for the Green Alder Mansions, well, there were trapezes and tree houses, climbing vines and bouncing nets. There was a swing that swung from the deep woods into the sunlight umpteen feet over the swamp. They climbed and they swung, they yodeled and whooped. "Oh, what a lark! Oh, what a spree! Oh, lucky me! Oh, lucky we!" Federly gasped. "I stubbed my toe," said Willie. Once more, the flotilla started out. Spinner came in his stern-wheeler and Cork in his outrigger. This time, they steered due north for the dark, creepy part of the swamp, where the willows stood with their feet in the water and tangled their snaky branches overhead. "Next port of call will be Far Willow Reaches, home of Twilaloo, federally announced. It's mid-afternoon and time for lupper, which comes halfway between lunch and supper. It's also time for spinning yarns and telling tales. When it comes to telling tales, Twilaloo can tell a Lulu. Heave ho for the bounding main. Watch out for that branch, said Willie. The new Summerfolk was heavy-set. Her house, her furniture, her chairs and baskets all were woven out of willow shoots. It was shady and cool in the far willow reaches. A watery green light flickered through the branches overhead. It was kind of spooky, but Willie didn't let on. Willow makes good fishing poles, said Willie. Twilaloo served Willie and the Summerfolk a lupper of deviled eggs, rye tack, and pickled pig's feet. After supper, she told their fortunes with an old tattered deck of cards. Then she told them the story of the purple glob, which swallowed people up and grew bigger and bigger until it's getting late, said Willie. So the flotilla started back, and Twilaloo's house barge came too. The sun was low in the west. This time they steered due south for Willie's landing. Toodaloo, said Federally. Farewell to you, said Rosebud. Stay out of the rain. Till we meet again, said Cork and Spinner. Au revoir, and many more, said Twilaloo. One by one, the Summerfolk slipped into the tall grass and disappeared with scarcely a rustle until Willie stood all alone in the tall grass. Willie felt a little empty and he felt a little sad, but he didn't let on. So long, said Willie, and he allowed that he might come out here and wait around for a spell next summer on the longest day of the year. That evening, as the sun went down, Willie and his dad, Joe Potts, sat in front of their shanty on the sand dune. The last of the Summerfolk were picking up their beach umbrellas and zooming away in their fast and fancy boats. Sand fleas, muttered Joe Potts. Thick as sand fleas and twice as pesky. Willie squinted his eyes and looked way out to where the sand met the sky. He thought back over the things very carefully and scratched his head. I reckon, said Willie, I reckon there's Summerfolk and Summerfolk, said Willie Potts.